Bungalow Bill here. I am somewhat surprised. There is a new patch 3.4.3 for the stable branch, and I've been playing on the alpha branch, but I imagine many of you have been playing on the stable branch to not have to deal with possibly repeated changes to the same systems. And many of the changes on alpha are not coming through to stable. It's primarily the less intrusive ones, so do not expect this to be disruptive towards your playstyle. Hopefully this will be purely beneficial, and the more controversial changes are still being baked in alpha. One of the changes that is in fact currently on the alpha branch is in the custom settings for the campaign. There is now a combat slider, which should change the difficulty class of the enemy vehicles that you're against, as well as a diplomacy slider. Previously, if you clicked easy and then use custom settings, so you were still on the easy spawn, the Heroic Isle, but you only had one difficulty slider, so if you wanted to face godly designs, you also had to fight everyone, and it just was not viable on the easy spawn's resources, so now you can mix and match, and that is very nice. I find some of the APS changes that have been made a little bit hard to parse, but here's my best impression of what they are. Heat secondary body for APS is only 70% of a head now. Final power is unchanged beyond the 5% base buff. I believe the power refers to the shell power as opposed to the damage. Initially, I thought that this was the length of the shape charge secondary. However, that remains the same. What I have noticed is that when I add a high explosive warhead body behind the shape charge secondary, this HE body contributes significantly more than the secondary. A secondary warhead is only 80% as powerful as a primary one with the same number of HE modules. So what this appears to be doing is both nerfing the initial head to 70% of the additional power, and then it still has the whole secondary system is only 80% as powerful as a normal one. Hesh base power up by 11%, heat base power up by 5%, squash and shaped charge base power increased by 15% for APS only. Again, it doesn't say anything about damage, it only says something about power, so that just appears to be firepower recalculations. And those are for the actual head and bodies respectively. Now for a patch note that I did not see on the alpha test branch. Garbage collection. Turned off incremental garbage collection to see if it improves stability. I had a little bit of a talk on the Discord about what this meant, and apparently with the upgrade to Unity 2021, incremental garbage collection became turned on by default. It's possible there's something in the patch notes about it, but I don't actually recall having seen anything, so perhaps there wasn't as well. So I had noticed some amount of stuttering at some point that got introduced into the game. I'd be interested to see if this change reduces that amount of stuttering. Right now, I'm seeing long pauses and then of smooth running and then occasional stutters. It's hard for me to say if that's due to full heap compaction. It seems like there's another one. They seem too frequent for a full heap compaction, but on the beta branch more recently, before I saw this change, which probably is not on the beta branch, this is probably going to hit stable before beta unless there was a sneaky update. I was seeing much more frequent micro stutters, so it's a subjective thing, could be wrong. It's possible there could be no perceivable performance change. They haven't provided any statistics on the garbage collection data in terms of profiling, so I can't really say. The reason that they did it wasn't performance-based. When it says is to increase stability, what it appeared to be to them was that when they were looking at all of these crashes that they were getting after the Unity 2021 update, that it looks like corruption, and they believe it's caused by the incremental garbage collection, so they're turning it off, and hopefully that'll fix things. However, given that incremental garbage collection was off when we were on the 2017 Unity, I wouldn't expect worse performance due to full heap compaction issues, at least than we had before. So it's hard to say. For the software product that I work on, when we start to get, and like the amount of time that's spent doing garbage collection is highly dependent on what you're compacting. But once we start to run out of memory on some of our servers that run Java, they can have very long garbage collection cycles where there's a lot of stuff on the heap and there's not a lot of free space, so they have to collect incredibly aggressively. It's very environment dependent, so there are no real sweeping generalizations I can make. Hopefully this will fix the crashes, but I think we're going to see slight performance differences, because again, subjectively, this seems smoother to me, with occasional stutters, whereas before it seemed like there were large numbers of smaller micro stutters. Again, subjective. Missiles. Checks for invalid components added to missile loading and some other places where it was missing. Default missiles for newly placed launch pads improved. Initial speed for drop as bomb option in rail gantries reduced from 30 to 25 meters per second. Once we get to bug fixes, we'll see where that might have something to do with the bug fixes. It feels like a very small balancing tweak that wasn't really needed, so I think it wasn't actually a balancing tweak. So here we have a default missile. I didn't change this. When I do a single small pod, this is what I get. The primary difference is here the thrust output is smaller. And the reason this was done was that people were complaining that these interceptors just weren't turning in time if they weren't tilted towards the enemy missiles. So because slow missiles have a faster turn rate, Java's solution was to slow them down. You can still go into the variable thruster and do whatever you want to. Also, it starts with a fuel tank instead of APN guidance, so they'll still need tweaking. Also, checks for invalid missile components, which to me suggests, and I believe is the case, Yep, so you are not allowed missile interceptors on large missiles, so we get a reinforced body instead. Wheels. It is now possible to only display the spring and axle for a wheel, not the block attachment. This is listed as a bug, but is not under the bug changes, or rather, it has a bug tracker attached to it, but it's not under the bug fix changes, because I think it's fair enough that this is not really a bug. It's an improvement. Okay, so show suspension is now modal. 0, hide the suspension. 1, display both suspension and block attachment. 2, display only the suspension part and not the block attachment. Okay, that's neat. I can definitely see why you'd want that. The block attachment is probably hard to actually get looking really the way that you want it to look. If I wanted this sort of thing in, I would deco it in. Additionally, you can now change the display that from the depths is on. This is another one that was on the alpha test branch. It would not exactly be demonstratable for me, but you can imagine what it does. A few changes have been made to the animation block. You can also adjust the size of the model via the animation block UI. Choose a pose/preset animation from the large selection via the drop-down list. The standard droid is fully functional with the animation block and breadboard. We will be releasing more models as DLC in the future. Yeah. Which will allow you to use custom bipedal models that have a proper inverse kinematic setup. So there will certainly be influx of, ship girls and cat boys or whatever. I have no idea why this has the weapons block. So anyway, the larger portion of this is apparently they added inverse kinematics for this and primarily through use with the breadboard. So apparently, inverse kinematics control of the droid models has been added to the breadboard. I cannot figure out how to get it to work. However, in theory, it should be possible to position limbs of your droid using this. I would imagine put in the droid name and, get it to do something. But there is not really a user guide for this, and I don't particularly have the interest in actually animating the droid to learn how to do this with brute force. As for the bug fixes, as I'm increasingly being filled with existential dread, ACB controllers now work correctly if they're spawned in a destroyed state and are then repaired. I don't actually know what the bug was with that originally. Fixed the breadboard to animation block filtering by name. It does appear to work even if I can't figure out how to use the animation blocks in the breadboard. Breadboard, fix an issue where some breadboard components would run their logic more than one time per frame. One-shot components will now correctly only activate once, probably related to the first point. The first output of the steering info component now indicates whether the mainframe's movement is turned on or off. Okay, that's nice to have, so that you can actually have that do something in your breadboard, because my breadboard craft just keeps going when you turn its movement off. And so the issue with breadboard components running their logic more than one times per frame, I thought was a threading issue. So it wasn't even that they would run their logic more than one time per frame, it's that sometimes they would run more than one times per frame, and sometimes they wouldn't run at all, and it was a bit problematic. Fixed fortress turbines taking damage when out of power if the language is changed from English. That's a bizarre bug. Campaign, fix strategic AI moving fleets through terrain they cannot move through, resulting in fleets getting stuck. Yeah, if you've watched my playthroughs, you've seen that happening a lot. Fix the rare issue where the strategic AI would not correctly change the path of a fleet if its destination changed. That could sort of explain some of the rogue fleets that have been happening, but probably not the same bug. Fleets with a patrol route set up will now properly save and load the waypoint they're moving towards. I don't know if that's for us or for the AIs, but sometimes your fleets would load waypoints in the wrong place after battle and send themselves into neutral territory and cause issues. Diplomacy, fixed a problem preventing the player from getting options with a lot of enemies. We have different perspectives on what a problem is. EMP charges can now travel between constructs. So apparently this is the case for both EMP and impact. All right, so what do we have here? Hopefully this will be better testing. We have a heavy armor block, a spin block, and a mainframe. Yep, okay, moves through sub-objects. I would imagine previously the reason I was having issues with that was because of how low my damage numbers were the last time I tested it and figured that wasn't what it was actually doing. So now in the future, spin block armor cheese won't work anymore. Explosions should now be rounder. It probably won't change a thing as no explosions reach their max radius. I find the explanations here a little bit lacking. Fleet movement. A fleet with a land unit will no longer move over water. I think it used to just be based on the flagship. Gridcast. Fixed a rare problem causing gridcasts with alignment very close to a construct's rotation to miss. Hologram projector. Hologram projector now works correctly if they are spawned in a destroyed state and then repaired. Lasers. Lasers fired through non-UI, non-manual methods will keep aiming forward as they are rotated. So I would assume this would be if you put them on a spin block and change the spin block angle to aim them. I guess they didn't work with that before, although I thought I'd seen people doing that to some extent. They would probably manually aim the lasers as well. Charged lasers will fire if either continuous or pulse shot does more damage than the minimum damage set in the output regulator. Well, that's how I would hope they'd work. I don't know what the bug was that's fixing. Some Lua additions. Fixed large and huge rail gantry missiles, sometimes getting tangled on their gantry when being dropped as bombs. Separating or attaching a vehicle while the player is in a chair will no longer eject the player from the chair except from multiplayer clients. Fixed steam transmissions, not their input's RPM limit for their gear ratio in some cases when loading. I actually can't parse that sentence. I have no idea what that means. Changed render cues for smoke and shields to render properly in front of and behind glass. Transparency rendering issues are hard. Playing local video is now working again. The suspension spring, axle, and block are now displayed hidden correctly when the setting is changed when loading the blueprint when repaired or placed as a prefab for wheels. Wings, effective speed for wings is capped at the main speed of the construct, so no ornithopters unstable now either. 2 quick things I missed. At least one of the available diplomacy options should now not cost any commodities. At the maximum difficulty level, the player's faction strength is now overestimated by ×3 plus 5 million rather than ×10 plus 10 million. I would imagine that is somewhat in conjunction with the other fix that prevented fighting a lot of enemies at the same time. Anyway, that's my attempt at parsing these patch notes. Let me know if you have any different readings of them. In some places, I found them a little bit difficult to figure out, and I often didn't have a base to compare the results against from the testing to really make it easy to figure out what they were talking about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope to see you in the future.